Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So this video, I was going to make it part of the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 review, but I think this segment with the audience questions is just a bit too long to stick into that review. So I'm going to put this out as a separate video to go alongside the full review of the bike. So check out the full review, which will have just already gone out. There'll be a link to that below and I'll try to link it here. In this video, what I'm going to do is answer the specific questions that you, audience members, sent in via all the social media platforms this week. So real simple, real informal, which I don't normally do, but it's kind of nice to do a video like this. It's real easy to make. So let's jump into your questions and answer your questions about the new Himalayan. All right, so you all sent in questions on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So let me go ahead and try to get through some of the questions you sent in. Gene Krebs, I'm a private lender lending out my personal funds. I give out, oh wait, that's spam, isn't it? Okay, we'll skip through those. We'll try not to do the spam ones. Social media, you gotta love it. Okay, so Nathan Jenkins asks, how's the build quality and reliability really? What major mainstream brand is it most similar to? I would say the build quality is quite good. It's a dramatic improvement from where they were 10 years ago. Reliability, there are mixed reports out there, and we don't really know because the Sherpa 450 engine is a brand new engine, and this is a brand new bike. So I would not be comfortable talking about any sort of expected reliability. In terms of what brand it's most similar to, that's a tough one. I feel like Royal Enfield has their own feel and character that's not really like any of the other Japanese or European brands. Todd Willis, how are the vibrations at highway speeds? We've probably talked about this somewhere else in the video already. The vibrations are well under control through the handlebar, so they have a rubber mounted handlebar and rubber mounted foot pegs. I didn't feel any buzz through the handlebars, although the mirrors get very blurry above 80 miles an hour, above about 75 miles an hour actually. The foot pegs, you feel some vibration through the foot pegs at highway speeds. Not terrible, but it is there. It was worse for us because we had the rubber inserts taken out. Chris Spadafora says, how's the torque compared to other bikes? KTM 390, 300L, Honda, KLX 300. Well, those last two are dual sport bikes, so they're not quite in the same category. Being a 450, the torque is pretty good. Around 30 foot-pounds is decent. Like a KLR 650 is going to have more torque because that's a six bigger motor. But it's quite good. It's a huge improvement from the previous one, and I think it's adequate. Chad Gillespie says, I'd like to know the ability potential to ride 2-up as a world or long distance touring bike. Okay, I can't speak to 2-up riding. I think it's going to depend on where in the world you're riding and what are your highway speeds. I think if you have a passenger and luggage and you want to go at high speeds above, 70 miles an hour or 110 kilometers an hour, I would think twice about this bike for that kind of a use. I think for solo riders, it's good for highway speeds. For 2-up with luggage going up a hill at high speeds, I think that's where you're going to need more than that 40 horsepower. So you have to consider your needs there for 2-up riding. But for a around the world kind of touring bike, and I wanted to say this in another part of the review, so I guess now is a good time. I think this is my new favorite bike. If I was advising somebody on like a round the world type journey, I would put this in the top 2 or 3 on my list because you can fix it so easily, even with the toolkit that they give you under the seat. Stuff's made out of mild steel. You can bend it back into place. Like it's basic, I like the tube tires because I feel that that's going to be more reliable overall as long as you know how to spoon a tire and do a patch or replace the tube. So I think this is going to be an amazing world travel sort of bike. Nathan Eversole says it looks too heavy for a 450. Well, keep in mind, we're not talking about a 450 dirt bike or a 450 dual sport bike. This is an adventure travel bike made for long distance expeditions with luggage and gear and long maintenance intervals and to put miles on. So when you could look at it as an adventure bike, it's light. If you looked at it as a dual sport, it would be heavy, but it's not a dual sport bike. Peter Francis, this is another question about reliability. We don't really know. I mean, honestly, we don't really know. Personally, I would feel okay trusting it, but it's going to be up to you. Christopher Potier, sorry about the name, butchered the name. Is it comfortable? The old model is very comfortable, especially seat height to peg situation, rider triangle. Yes, I find this new one to be just as comfortable, I think more comfortable than the Himalayan 411 was. The rider triangle is very relaxed, upright, roomy, tons of leg room. I was very comfortable riding this bike all day. Paul Bill says, when are they going to put a decent length side stand on it? Needs to be 2 or 3 inches longer to avoid leaning over too much. Yeah, a lot of people have mentioned this with Royal Enfield. It seems to be an Enfield thing where the bikes kind of lean a lot on the side stand. I found that sometimes when it was sinking into mud or soft sand, but I would say I didn't find it to be really anything extreme. I would just get a little side stand foot, which I'm sure you can find on eBay or Amazon, and just bolt on there. I do it on all my bikes, and that would probably solve the problem, but I didn't find it to be a big problem. Joshua and Oksana Renault says, power to weight ratio still seems low. Yeah, that's basically true. It's kind of true of all the bikes in this kind of low capacity adventure segment, right? But it's adequate as we've shown. Jordan Watson says, how would it be for big guys? Is it a full-size bike? It'll be fine. So a lot of people confuse engine size with bike size. They're not related. They're not the same thing. You could have a physically large motorcycle that has a small engine. Inversely, you could have a physically small motorcycle with a large engine. So this is a large full-size motorcycle with a lot of room ergonomically for a big person, just happens to have a smaller engine. We had some folks on the ride that were larger guys, and they seem to be very comfortable riding the bike all day. Chris Phillips says, it's not really a question, but he says, it reminds me of a slimmer, trimmer KLR 650. Yeah, that's exactly what it reminds me of too, and I love it. This comment from Chris Heffernan says, why buy a bike that looks like a V-Strom when you can just go out and buy a Suzuki V-Strom? Yeah, well, the Suzuki V-Strom is a great bike, but much heavier, much more expensive. Even the 650s or 800s, you're talking about almost double the price tag, a lot heavier, not nearly as good off-road as this smaller Himalayan. So kind of a different class of bike, not really a fair comparison there. Derek Gamache says, does it make enough power that it's not boring? I think it does. I think 40 horsepower is just enough where it's kind of enough power to be a little bit fun. You can kind of spin the tire a little bit if you're willing to kind of really give it the beans. And as you have saw, hopefully in the riding segment, we all had a blast riding it. I think 40 horsepower is just enough. Shane Green, I don't understand the double front fender thing. Well, we certainly found that out in the mud. Yeah, it's for regulations, I'm sure, because they can't have rocks and mud and water throwing up from the tire onto the bike into the rider. So they've got to have these fenders, I guess. Some dirt bikes and adventure bikes will have just an upper fender that goes around to the back that does that. This bike, they had to do the double fender. I'm not sure all the packaging and engineering reasons why. You see it on almost all adventure bikes, and it can be a problem in heavy mud situations like we ended up at in Utah. William Mark, I can't say the last name, Schwindenhammer, looks heavy like a slower KLR. It's lighter than a KLR, but it has the same power, lower to the ground, lower center of gravity, way better suspension, way better transmission. It is a lighter, slimmer, faster KLR 650 that I'd much rather ride this than the KLR. So actually, it's just a better version. Kai Ui Och, I'm sorry about the name. How good is the suspension compared to the CRF 300L, another budget adventure? Well, so the CRF 300L and the Rally have, in my opinion, horrible suspension, super soft and springy, one of the worst I've ever tested. This is in a whole nother league to that, so much better. So really good suspension on the Royal Enfield. Francois Lataste says, tall riders, it's good for tall riders. He says, I ride a T7 but would like to add a lighter bike. Is it lighter enough or not really? I think it is. I mean, it feels like a huge difference in terms of being lighter, easier to ride, and more friendly than the Tenere 700. A professional expert rider could ride the Tenere 700 faster through off-road terrain, but I think the average or beginner rider is going to be a lot more comfortable riding the Royal Enfield. Eric Hunky says, seat comfort after about 1 hour, more than 1 hour of riding. It was good. I found it to be very good seat comfort. Expected aftermarket parts availability in the US. They've been pretty good for Royal Enfield parts and aftermarket stuff so far, so I would expect the new bike to be the same, but give them some time to catch up to the new model. Brandon Ward, what is the real world mileage on the highway? Okay, excellent. You know, we were seeing most of our bikes were seeing around high 50s or almost around 60 miles per gallon, which is, I'll put the metric conversion here, but very, very good, giving you a tank range of over 250 miles or over 400 kilometers, which I thought was phenomenal. Another question about vibration, we covered that. Is this, Axel Hernandez, is this a good beginner off-roader adventure that can do long trips as well? Yes, that's absolutely what this bike is. Good description. All right, some more questions from Facebook. Bruno Lucidarme says, why would you get it over the KTM 390? Similar horsepower, but nearly 50 pounds heavier. Maybe it's a suspension. So, a good question. The KTM 390 Adventure, unfortunately, was designed based off a street bike, off the Duke. And because of that, it just has too many compromises. It doesn't have the ground clearance. It doesn't have the suspension travel or suspension feel. It doesn't have a 21-inch front wheel. It just is not the off-road bike that the Himalayan is. Also, on paper, the weight difference may be 50 pounds, 40 to 50 pounds, but it does not feel heavier to me. Well, maybe a tiny bit heavier than a 390, but not much. So whatever Royal Enfield has done to keep the mass centralized, they've done a very good job. After having ridden both, I would choose the Royal Enfield. The KTM's a little sportier for like on the highway for sport riding on the road. Royal Enfield's better off-road and I think is a better overall package than the KTM, which makes sense because the Royal Enfield has been designed ground up as an adventure bike, where the KTM was not. Dan Ketchbull, hey Dan, he says, he talks about engine feel, torque power bands, vibration, is it rough, how's the clutch and shift? So we covered a lot of that already throughout the video and the review. The clutch and shifting I found to be very good. The shifter seemed great. I never missed a shift or had a false neutral. The clutch has a very light pull, but it has good feel, good. We never stalled. Like that part seemed to be really dialed in. He also says, does it feel heavy or is it reasonable? Sometimes the spec sheets don't translate to feel. So yeah, that's the case with this bike. Like you see 432 pounds on the spec sheet, you're like, I don't know, kind of heavy. Doesn't feel that way in real life. I think it's just low enough that it doesn't seem to be a problem. Chris Kavam, I'd like to know how it stacks up against other light adventure bikes. So I'm talking about that in the other segment where I do the comparisons to everything in the class. So that's already covered. All right, Instagram questions. Let me scroll through these here. Comfort for long travel, comfort on interstate. We talked about that. Cruise control, yeah, it is a ride-by-wire bike, but you know, nothing in this category has cruise control, so I just don't think that's kind of an expectation in this, you know, this kind of price range for an adventure bike. Although I admit it would be nice to have it. I'm hoping that companies like Viridian Cruise or others will come out with an aftermarket plug-and-play cruise control. I'm fingers crossed for that, and I bet that will eventually happen. This person compared, I got a lot of questions about comparing to the new Ibex 450 or 450 MT from CF Moto. I just can't offer that comparison yet because the CF Moto is not really in the United States yet for testing, so that'll come later. Moto Vana says, what happened to the tubeless spoked wheels? Yeah, so the tubeless rims are going to be available, but they're not available on the first bikes that are going out to dealers in the USA, but they are going to be available on 2 of the colorways, I believe. So you will be able to get that. I believe there's a slight additional cost, but the first bikes to go to the dealers, a lot of which were sold on a pre-order, you're not going to have any of those. This is a good question. I like this one. Sir Captain Corey says, is it as charming as the previous Himalayan? Does it add capability without sacrificing lovability? That is such an insightful question. I believe that it does retain the character, kind of the thumpy single-cylinder motor, you know, just the charismatic feeling of it, the sound of it, the look of it. I think they did a great job maintaining that, but modernizing and improving every performance aspect and features aspect of the bike. So that's a hard thing to pull off, and I basically think they did it. Is the old one in some ways a little bit more charming because it's almost like really slow and kind of like almost like riding a vintage bike? If you like that vintage bike feel, yeah, I guess the 411 was better, but I think 99% of people are going to prefer the newer one. Stu Mumford says, more power, more gears, more tech, and less money than a KLR 650. Stu Mumford, you nailed it. That's exactly what it is. All right, let's jump into the questions I got on YouTube. Todd Abisher says, compare all the 450s together, add the Cove in there. Yeah, that's going to have to come at a future date. I would love to be able to do that. The Cove is super interesting, although that's really like a dirt bike, really with a big fuel tank. Very different than this, not really like a touring bike. We'll have to get to something like that later if time allows. Adventure Undone. By the way, Adam, Adventure Undone, I really like your channel. Go check out Adventure Undone channel if you haven't. Really, really good content. This compared to the Ibex 450 or the 450 MT and the Honda 300L Rally. So I've probably covered that enough in the comparison section when I have the chart talking about all the bikes in this segment. You know, CF Moto, I don't know yet because I haven't been able to test it yet. It's just getting to the States, like, you know, as we speak. As compared to the Honda 300L Rally is more of like a dual sport, like with a big tank and a windshield. The Royal Enfield is more of like an adventure touring bike, you know, bigger, heavier, more comfortable, better on the highway, more power. I'm not really a fan of the 300L Rally. I know that makes some people mad. I just didn't personally like it, although I get why people do. I really like the Royal Enfield. For whatever reason, I just like the Royal Enfield better. Vehicle Synergy Media. That sounds familiar. Is that you, Brandon? Sounds like what the KLR should have evolved into. That's well said. I totally agree with you. This isn't really a question, but Alex Euleri says, I ride a big 1200 and I've been looking into the small ADVs to add to the stable. I keep coming back to this bike. You should be. This is exactly made for people like you. I think, you know, if you have those big adventure bikes, maybe you want to add a second bike to the stable, you want something smaller for off-road, this would be a good option because it's still comfortable to do some highway on and load up with luggage, but it's really so much better off-road than the big adventure bikes, for the average rider anyway. Derek MP says, I'm debating selling my CRF 450 RL for this. Well, I probably wouldn't do that. Your 450 RL is like a performance dual sport bike, almost like a dirt bike. And the Royal Enfield is an adventure bike, much heavier, very different kind of a bike. Had a 9964. You gotta love the YouTube usernames. I don't know what all you guys' usernames are. They're crazy to me. Please do a review of the new Honda NX500. Yes, I am doing that very soon, so stay tuned for that, and we can talk about comparisons there. More reliability questions, can't really speak to that. Another, compared to the CB500X, which is the NX500, so we'll talk about that in another video. Robbie and Becky, is this a KLR 650 killer? I think it kind of is, and we've kind of talked about that already. Johnny TT8 says, how would this be for a beginner's bike? I think in terms of a beginner adventure bike, it's very, very good. I still would say if you want to do a lot of off-roading and you're learning that, I would push you to a dual sport bike, something like a KLX 230 or a KLX 300 or a CRF 250 or 300, because they're so much lighter if you're going to learn off-road. But if you're set on a more adventure bike for highway stuff, yeah, this would be one of the better ones for beginners for sure. All right, well, that about covers it. If there's questions that I missed that I didn't cover, put them down below in the comments to this video, and I will do my best to get back to you within a few days. Please check out the full review of the Himalayan. I think it's really good. I think you'll like it. And support the channel if you like what I do here. Thank you so much for watching. Ride safe, and I'll see you out there.